Happy New Year to all friends of the Boundary Waters out there. Thank you so much for all that you do to support our work to protect the Boundary Waters, the wilderness that we love. You are the strength of our organization. We have today two distinguished panelists. We have Max Kiley, our legal director and general counsel, and we have Eric Barstad with the law firm of Robbins Kaplan. And we are going to go through a couple big things here related to our work, particularly at the federal level, but our advocacy work more broadly. So please go to the next slide here. So we were just in Washington, D.C. On Monday and Tuesday and came back last night. And we were in federal court on Monday in an oral argument at the D.C. Court of Appeals in litigation involving Twin Metals. And then we were on Capitol Hill on Monday and Tuesday meeting with congressional offices about protecting the Boundary Waters. So that's kind of why we're here right now, to update you and to give you the exciting news and the sobering challenges that are out there. And so I want to begin by providing an overview here of the different tools that we have in our toolbox and the advocacy toolbox. And we have four: litigation, legislation, citizen action, and political action. So our focus today in this program will be on litigation and legislation. But the other tools are equally as important: citizen action and political action. And I want to thank all of you, friends of the Boundary Waters, people who are active in our citizen efforts, because you really mobilize and put the pressure on our legislators to advance our legislation. So please go to the next slide there. And this is a slide from our advocacy work that we do here at the Minnesota State Capitol and supporting legislation to protect the Boundary Waters. So thank you, all friends of the Boundary Waters, for mobilizing to put pressure on our elected officials and advance an agenda that protects the Boundary Waters. And I'm going to go through a bit of background here, setting the stage for a colloquy between Max and Eric here on what's been going on and what just happened over the last 2 days here. And so this is an overview of the two mines that are near the Boundary Waters. And the one closest to the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness is the Twin Metals mine. And that's in the light orange there, in kind of towards the upper right of your screen there. The other mine is the Polymet Tech mine, and that's in orange and red. The watershed divide between the Rainy River watershed that goes into the Boundary Waters is you can see it there. The Rainy River watershed goes to the north. To the south of that dashed line is the Lake Superior watershed. So collectively, these two mines would pollute the Rainy River watershed going to the north and the Lake Superior watershed going to the south. So what you see in this picture here, and you can see Ely at the top there, this is a mining zone. You need to think about it as a mining zone. It's not just a little dot on the map, it's really an area that will be impacted.
And also, I just want to jump in quickly and say that if anybody has any questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the question and answer or in the comments, and Jenny will feed them to us.
Yeah, actually, we already had a question. Someone wanted to know, how successful were you in meeting with legislators in DC?
Great, well, that's perfectly teed up. When we get to that portion, we'll talk about it. And this is a long fight, and we stand on the shoulders of those that have come before us. Since 1976, we've been working to protect the Boundary Waters, establishing the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness Area in 1978, and then all the challenges from them, from no flyover zones over the Boundary Waters to timbering, to acid mine issues, to cell tower issues. We've been there to fight for the Boundary Waters, and this is the latest chapter in this. And this is what we're talking about with these mines here, Twin Metals and this Polymet Tech mine, is something different. So when you're talking to family members or others, this is not traditional taconite mining. traditional taconite mining has a host of problems with it, but we're at an order of magnitude in threat to the environment here with copper nickel sulfide mining here. And the reason for that is that the rock ore has sulfide in it. And when it comes in contact with the environment, with water, you create sulfuric acid. And there is so much waste that is generated from this process. The actual ore itself, the copper and nickel, it's not 50% of the rock, it's not 25% of the rock, it's not 10% of the rock, it's not even 1% of the rock, it's 0.4% of the rock. So what you're looking at is 99.6% waste. So toxic stuff, a lot of waste.
And that's exactly where the engineering challenge lies, right? I mean, in order to make these mines economic, and profitable, you literally have to pull out hundreds of millions of tons of this waste rock. And obviously, therein lies the engineering challenge of how do you prevent water and air from coming across hundreds of millions of tons of waste rock for the lifetime of the mine and beyond, especially in a water-rich environment.
Exactly. And on top of that, in addition to having such a toxic industry, you have really corrupt bad actors that own these mines. And so Twin Metals is owned by Antofagasta, a Chilean mining conglomerate, and Polymet is owned by Glencore, a Swiss mining conglomerate. And both these parent companies have notorious business practices. On the left there, you see the owner of then CEO of Glencore receiving the Medal of Friendship from Vladimir Putin. Glencore has a host of violations across the globe that Max will highlight a bit. And then Antofagasta, when President Trump was first elected in November 2016, before the year was out, the family that owns Antofagasta, the Lutzik family, bought a mansion in Washington, D.C. and rented it out to Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. And so these are the types of companies that we're talking about here. We have a few headlines about their corrupt practices, and Max, if you want to expand on that a bit.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, as a starting point, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is labeled and identified copper sulfide nickel mining as the most polluting industry in the United States. It simply, technology does not exist for these mines to operate without polluting. And you see that in the track record globally of the parent companies of Polymet and Twin Metals. For example, over the last 15 years, Antofagasta has had more than 1.5, close to $2 million in environmental fines. Glencore has had over $10 million of environmental fines. In addition to that, it entered a guilty plea for the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in relation to bribery and price fixing. And it was truly an international scandal. I mean, literally, you had individuals from Glencore traveling around the world with briefcases full of money trying to buy people off. And also, Talon Mine. Rio Tinto is a sort of the parent owner of that. They've paid over $3 million in environmental fines in the last 15 years. And what you really see is these companies, one, the technology doesn't exist to do this safely. And two, it's cheaper to flout environmental laws, pollute the natural landscape, and then just pay the regulators the money that they charge you. It's cheaper to do it, to violate the laws, to pollute, than it is to do things right. And simply they can't do things right because the technology doesn't exist. We don't want these bad actors doing business in a water-rich environment such as Minnesota.
Great, thanks, Max. And it will, these next couple slides give a sense of what we're really talking about here. This is the Twin Metals site. It's right over those bluffs there. And so Twin Metals would create a mountain of waste just yards away from this shoreline here. And the proposed Polymet mine is in an area that was known on historic maps as the 100-year swamp, 100-mile swamp. And so it's a really rich area of peat, hugely a lot of richness in its ecological value. It's a huge carbon sink that's stored there. And so the polymet site is also very, very important.
And not only is it a carbon sink, it's a mercury sink, right? And by creating this huge open pit mine, you mobilize that mercury and you effectively send it downstream to the Fond du Lac Band's reservation, which would significantly impact its mercury water quality standards. And also, like, you know, just importantly, the polymet site sits on major tributaries to the St. Louis River, which in turn are major tributaries to, which is a major source of fresh water for Lake Superior. So, I mean, any pollution, any acid mine drainage, any heavy metal leaching would have catastrophic consequences for aquatic flora and fauna, and would really devastate the tribal way of life down in the Fond du Lac reservation.
And these two mines are within the 1854 ceded territories. So the Fond du Lac Band, the Grand Portage Band, and Bois Forte bands have retained rights in the entire arrowhead. And so it's really important to appreciate the environmental justice problems that these proposed mines create. And Max alluded to it, the Fond du Lac reservation is downstream from Polymet. And Polymet's rigorous water quality standards that have been reviewed and approved by the federal government were completely disregarded in the process for the permitting of Polymet. And this is also a good spot to add, Max alluded to it, the proposed Talon mine, the Tamarack Water Alliance, and especially the Mille Lacs Band has been leading the fight of the water over nickel campaign there. And so these environmental justice issues are really a problem here with these mines where indigenous voices and rights are not taken into account. And you know, I'll kind of add that we've been co-parties with the Fond du Lac Band in the Polymet litigation for the last several years. And so now I'm kind of teeing it up for Max and Eric to take us through this game of kind of ping pong where the ball goes from President Obama to President Trump to President Biden here on different actions taken by the executive branch. And this is, there's a lot to discuss here. And so starting with the Obama administration and what happened before, we're looking in the context of, again, now we're focusing on the Twin Metals mine.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So then I'm teeing it up for you guys.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, you know, Eric, before we get into that, do you want to provide a quick overview of, you know, Twin Metals leases and some of the history before we get into the specific acts of Obama and Trump and Biden?
Yep, I'm happy to do that. And again, just to introduce myself again, my name is Eric Barstad. I'm a lawyer at the Robbins Kaplan law firm here in Minneapolis, and I've had the privilege of representing the Friends in connection with the saga that is the Twin Metals litigation since 2017, 2018. So been around for a while, and the leases in question actually go back even farther than that. The lease agreements that are at issue in these cases were actually entered into in 1966 with a predecessor company of Twin Metals. Among other things, those original leases, basically said that in fairly plain terms, basically said, if the lessee starts actually producing minerals from the mine within the term of this lease, then the lessee will be entitled to renewal. If the lessee does not start producing within, the 20-year term of this lease, then the lessee, then any renewal will be at the discretion of the federal government. And so those terms became relevant in more recent years in some of this ongoing litigation. But long story short, the leases were first entered into in 1966, and then in 1989 they were renewed. And then in 2004, the term of that 1989 renewal was almost up, and so a different Twin Metals predecessor applied to renew once again. That renewal was granted. And then fast forward to 2012, now Twin Metals itself, the company, has entered the picture, and they apply to renew the leases for a third time. And so everything that has unfolded since then comes against the backdrop of that 2012 application that Twin Metals filed to renew those two leases that were first established back in 1966. Is that enough backstory, Max?
Yeah, that's perfect, Eric.
Okay.
Just opening it up very quickly, does anybody have any questions about sort of the history of Twin Metals before we get into the specific acts of Obama and Trump and Biden and sort of where we are now?
Not specifically that. There's a few other questions that I think that we will potentially get into later.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, Eric, why don't you take us through, what happened, Twin Metals was created, 2010, acquires Franconia, that was the holder of the leases, in 2011, sort of reapplies for these, a renewal of the 2004 leases in 2012. Tell me about, what the Obama administration did with respect to that lease renewal application.
Yep. So ultimately, in 2016, the Obama administration, acting through the solicitor of the Department of the Interior, the Obama DOI solicitor's name was Hillary Tompkins. They issued something called an M opinion, which is just sort of a term of art that refers to a legal opinion that the solicitor of this agency issues. And in that opinion, Solicitor Tompkins concluded that Twin Metals did not have a non-discretionary right to renew the lease, and that the Bureau of Land Management, which is the sub-agency that makes the lease decisions, that BLM had discretion to grant or deny their lease application. BLM then asked whether the Forest Service consented to the renewal, and after soliciting public comment, the Forest Service said that it did not consent. So, in an exercise of its discretion, the agency decided not to renew the leases. Twin Metals sued after that decision came down, but ultimately, before that suit really got off the ground, President Trump was elected in 2016, and the story went back to the Department of the Interior for the next steps. So in 2017, there's a new administration with a new solicitor at the Department of the Interior.
Excuse me, Eric, maybe I want to have you expand on two things. The first thing is that the Obama administration, when it made this determination, it had done a lot of public input and evaluating various factors, environmental and other factors, to determine whether it was in the best interest of the federal government to continue with those leases. Why don't you expand on that point? That it was based in fact and science, right?
Yes, it was. So the Forest Service, ultimately its decision not to consent to the lease renewal was based on fulsome public comment. So it took that into consideration, and then it also relatedly took into account the inherent environmental risks involved, and determined that that it was sounder not to renew the lease than to renew the lease, and so in its discretion, it declined to renew the lease.
Great, thank you. And everyone, there's a interplay between two departments. The Department of Interior controls the subsurface mineral leases. The Department of Agricultural, through the U.S. Forest Service, the Superior National Forest, controls the surface rights. So just what you're seeing here with getting how the Superior National Forest and the Bureau of Land Management interplay is a result of this dynamic between the surface estate, if you would, and then the subsurface estate with the minerals beneath it. So,
and also I think it's important to note that during the Obama administration, the Forest Service began environmental review into a potential mineral withdrawal in the Superior National Forest. And through that process, like Eric said, this was a very fulsome scientific, and factual inquiry, and really was delving into the propriety of conducting this type of mining in the Superior National Forest and the impacts that it would have on Native nations, as well as the economy and the Rainy River watershed. And so, with that, Eric, sort of when the Trump administration took over, maybe get back into sort of what they did with respect to Obama's findings.
Yep. So after about a year in office, the new solicitor of the Department of the Interior, an attorney named Daniel Giorgiani, in 2017 issued his own opinion that reversed the Tompkins opinion that came out during the Obama administration, and which was the basis for the government's decision not to renew the Twin Metals leases. Solicitor Giorgiani's opinion concluded that whether Twin Metals was entitled to a discretionary right to review or not was ambiguous under the text of the agreements themselves. And so turning to outside evidence, he concluded that it was the intent of the parties to keep the operative terms and their non-discretionary terms in place, even if production had not commenced. So Solicitor Giorgiani concluded that the leases provided for a third non-discretionary right to renewal, and then BLM reinstated the leases and Twin Metals' third renewal application. That is the agency action that triggered the friends and our partners in these litigation efforts to file suit against the BLM's decision to reinstate those leases. And Max, did you want to mention some of our legal partners in this?
Yeah, certainly. The Friends, obviously is not alone in its challenge to both the Trump administration, the first Trump administration's actions to reinstate the leases, presumably the Trump second administration's same efforts, as well as defending along with the federal government, the Biden administration's cancellation of those leases. And we couldn't do it by ourselves. In fact, we're working with a robust set of allies, including Northeastern Minnesota's for Wilderness, a coalition of businesses and outfitters up in the Ely area and Sawville area, Gunflint area, as well as the legal representation that we've received from on behalf of that coalition of parties, including Robbins Kaplan Morrison and Forster Earth Justice, as well as the Wilderness Society is part of that coalition as well. So, we thank our group of allies that are taking these actions, and especially we thank our attorneys, because none of this would be possible without them. And also, I'll note, Eric, these M opinions, right? These are Department of Interior can't just come in and say, like, with a wave of a magic wand, we're going to reinstate these leases. These M opinions are binding legal precedent, right, within the Department of Interior. So in order to take, for Trump to take a contrary act with respect to the leases from Obama, they have to sort of formulate a new M opinion with legal justifications for why the leases should be reinstated. And those legal justifications in turn become the factual and legal basis for challenges in court.
Yep, that's right. Thanks, Max.
And so what we had here, Eric, was essentially like a forever lease, right? Based on this. Boy, you could renew it and renew it and renew it and renew it without necessarily having to engage in any operation. So a forever lease. So the Trump administration says a forever lease to Twin Metals, and we sued in federal court in Washington, D.C. in the federal district court with our legal partners there. And then as that litigation was moving forward, then we moved into actions by the Biden administration. And maybe you can straddle that transition there. I know there's a lot of that litigation, but then moving to what the Biden administration has done.
Yep. So definitely, I'll move a little more quickly here. So after the leases were renewed by the Trump administration, we again had a change of administration, and again, about a year into the Biden administration, the Solicitor of the Interior, a person named Anne Marie Bledsoe Downs, issued another M opinion, which withdrew the Trump solicitor Giorgiani M opinion, and concluded that the Trump administration's renewals of the Twin Metals leases was unlawful. As a result of that, now Twin Metals was in the position of suing the federal government, and so Twin Metals filed suit after that decision from the Interior Secretary came down. And this time, what that meant was that the environmental groups that have been involved in these legal efforts were now led to intervene as a defendant in the case on the side of the government. And so that lawsuit. Yep.
Before we get into the guts of that litigation, maybe both Max and Eric, you could talk about what we have on the screen here. So we have Twin Metals becomes the plaintiff now because it wants to get its leases back. And the Biden administration also did what? So Max and Eric, take it from here.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll just quickly say, it started by the Obama administration and canceled by the Trump administration, restarted by the Biden administration. The U.S. Forest Service completed an environmental assessment with respect to a mineral withdrawal application to the Department of Interior, and the environmental review there, the environmental assessment effectively found that copper nickel sulfide mining in the Superior National Forest in the Rainy River watershed would be catastrophic for Native nations, for water quality, and just simply would not be compatible with the pristine nature of the land and water in that area. And as a result of that moratorium, the federal government took the position that it was required to reject Twin Metals PERLAs. These things are called PERLAs. They're preferential right lease applications. So Twin Metals had 2 preferential right lease applications pending, but the federal government found that these PERLAs were discretionary and pursuant to the statutory and regulatory scheme underlying the mineral withdrawal, the mineral moratorium, it was compelled to deny and reject those preferential right lease applications, which also sort of set up in conjunction with the Biden administration's lease cancellations, Twin Metals, the basis of Twin Metals' lawsuit challenging the federal government's actions.
So folks kind of listening to all this, you can see there's a lot to it. So we have Twin Metals leases that had been that were canceled because there was not a right to renew them, and then the additional Biden administration protections on federal lands right around there, where Twin Metals was applying to do other potential mining. That with this moratorium in place, it kind of took that off the table and provided an additional layer of protection. And that kind of sets the stage for this litigation that Eric was teed up. So Twin Metals is now suing the federal government, and we intervene as a party. Friends of the Boundary Waters intervenes as a party here. And so this is a caption from one of the pleadings here, and Eric and Max kind of walk us through this now.
Yeah, so Twin Metals sued the federal government in DC District Court, challenging the agency's denial and cancellation of their leases. The merits of their claim weren't addressed because the federal government and us as interveners, we moved to dismiss the Twin Metals lawsuit for, again, kind of a legal term of art, arguing that the court lacked jurisdiction to hear their claim. And the reason for this is that under this law called the Tucker Act, any contract claims that are brought against the federal government, like a contractor, argues that the federal government, breached some contract that they had. Anyone who brings a claim like that, a contract claim, has to do so in this special court called the Court of Federal Claims, which specializes in these kinds of disputes. Also, as it turns out, whereas normal courts like the DC District Court, as a remedy, they can order parties to do something, to take some action. They could, for example, conceivably order the federal government to reverse course and reinstate the leases that had been canceled, for example. But the Court of Federal Claims can't do that. The only thing the Court of Federal Claims can do is award money damages. So, hypothetically, if the litigation by Twin Metals against the federal government were to play out in the Court of Federal Claims, and if Twin Metals were to prevail, Twin Metals, might get, significant money damages if the court were to conclude that, that the federal government breached the Twin Metals lease, but Twin Metals would not be able to get actual performance of the leases and reinstatement of the leases. And so, understandably, Twin Metals opposed our motion to dismiss, and argued that the DC District Court did have jurisdiction, and that really this wasn't a contract claim. It was sort of a standard, what's called an Administrative Procedure Act claim, the sort of claim that people bring all the time anytime a federal agency is alleged to have, taken some arbitrary and capricious action, for example.
So yeah, Eric, to break that down quickly, Eric. So Twin Metals basically said, no, we're not seeking money damages. We're just saying the legal justification set forth in the Downs M opinion, right? Canceling the leases is just wrong, right? We just want the Downs opinion set aside and to go back to where we were before that, because that was arbitrary and capricious. We're not here trying to get money. We're just trying to set aside arbitrary federal administrative actions.
And, for folks listening there, so you can ask yourself for, somebody who may have an apartment lease right now. I mean, that lease is a contract, right? And so this is, at essence, a mineral lease is a lease, which is a contract. And so kind of at the district court level, Eric and Max, who lost at the district court level?
Twin Metals lost. So the district court judge granted the federal government and interveners motion to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction. In response to that order, Twin Metals appealed, and that appeal was heard by the Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit, which is kind of like next to the Supreme Court. It's like the most important, most prestigious federal court in the country, because they hear so many of the important federal government related cases that emanate out of DC. And so it was in relation to that appeal that Chris, Max, my colleague Steve Safransky, and I were in Washington earlier this week. The parties, as normally happens with these appeals, the parties filed their briefs. So Twin Metals filed a brief arguing that the district court was wrong, and that it did have jurisdiction, that its claim was not required to be heard in the Court of Federal Claims. We and the federal government submitted our own briefs that advanced counter arguments and explained why Twin Metals was wrong, and why the district court judge was right. And then we all got together in the courtroom on Monday for oral argument. So Twin Metals hired a really exceptional constitutional litigator from White Shoe Washington law firm, who made their argument before a panel of 3 judges of the court. And then the government's lawyer made their argument, and then co-counsel of ours named Eileen McGrath at the Morrison and Forrester law firm argued for just a few minutes on behalf of the environmental group interveners. What happens next is somewhat unclear. With the November election and the prospect of a second Trump administration again taking the reins of the government and the Department of the Interior, it's not clear what actions may be taken in regard to Twin Metals' interests.
Eric and Max, why don't you give folks a feel for the oral argument? It was kind of what is known as kind of a hot bench.
And let me back up first before we get into how the appellate panel was. Let me just ask you something, Eric. So this is, as we've seen throughout this conversation today, this is a very political issue, right? It's sort of a ping pong back between Obama and Trump and Biden. Can you tell us about the political appointees of these the judges on the panel, and whether or not you think that politics would play a role in the court's ultimate decision?
Yeah, sure. So when there's an appeal like this, it's not initially heard by all the appellate judges. It's heard by a randomly selected panel of 3 judges. And so, one of the first data points that that folks look to when they're trying to figure out whether the panel that they draw might be favorably or unfavorably disposed to their case is look at the political affiliation of the presidents that appointed those judges. In our case, we had one judge that was appointed by Jimmy Carter, actually, rest in peace, President Carter, back in 1980. So he's a senior judge at this point, but very, very experienced, and has sort of seen it all and been around for everything. We had another judge who was appointed by the Obama administration. And then finally, our third judge was a Trump appointee. But certainly, a very reputable and well-credentialed lawyer and judge. And so going into the argument on Monday, I don't think we exactly knew what to expect. But it was clear on Monday that all three judges had really done their homework, had been seriously analyzing and considering the positions advanced by the parties, and they were aggressive in their questioning, especially as to some of the arguments advanced by Twin Metals. But no, I did not. I thought it seemed like a very neutral and fair bench, and a group of judges who will not let politics sway their decision one way or the other. I mean, is that consistent with your impression, Max and Chris?
Yeah, certainly. And so you have Judge Edwards, who was the Carter appointee, who took senior status in 2005. Who my impression was he was very well read, very vociferous in his questioning, especially of Twin Metals. Right? You had Judge Katsas, who was the Trump appointee. And again, he was he was tracking the issues. He was asking very thoughtful questions as well. And then Judge Wilkins, who was an Obama appointee. As Chris mentioned, it was a really hot bench, and the way that the appellate oral arguments work is you have 15 minutes per side, and for our side we sort of split time with the federal government, 12 minutes and 3 minutes. But here the arguments, the court sort of let Twin Metals go longer, let the government attorney go longer, let our attorney go longer, but by a fair amount of time. What is your impression when a court allows that amount of time to ask questions? Does that mean they care more about the case, that they're more interested in the case? What's your experience there?
Yeah, I think it's a recognition of the complexity and significance of the case. I mean, as I think has probably become clear just as a result of this discussion today, even this is a complicated and esoteric area of the law, even for people who do this for a living. So the judges had a lot of questions for Twin Metals, and clearly wanted to get they gave Twin Metals, I think, their lawyer every opportunity to answer those questions, and did not sort of rely on the clock to put an end to anything. The Twin Metals lawyer really just sort of sat down after she determined that that there was nothing further, and I think went for 2, maybe even close to 3 times the sort of the allotted initial argument time. So the court was in no rush to cut the parties off or sort of render its review of this matter anything but like super intensive. So that's how the argument went. A decision ordinarily could be expected to come down as to Twin Metals appeal, anywhere from 30 to 90 days after an argument like that occurs. So we're all kind of in wait and see mode right now, and obviously on Monday we have the new administration taking over, and it's possible that the administration will take some actions that affect the pending appeal. And so we may see some more legal maneuvering as a result of that.
And let me ask you about that, Eric. Twin Metals attorneys, started out with why the court should not consider the case, right? Why it should preserve judicial economy and efficiency and not render an opinion in light of the Trump 2.0 coming in and undoubtedly rescinding the mineral withdrawal, reinstating the mineral leases and the preferential right lease applications. What was your impression of the court's reaction to that, and what do you anticipate Twin Metals to do once the Trump administration actually comes into power again?
The court certainly did not seem very receptive to Twin Metals' argument to stay the appeal based on the incoming Trump administration. I think it's fair to say that we can all sort of speculate generally that the Trump administration may do something that impacts what's been unfolding before the courts in DC. It's really not clear. It's not ripe at this point, and the dispute that the parties have been litigating is still very much alive and very much ripe, and I think that a lot of resources have been expended on it already, and I think the court rightly saw that there was no reason to hold up the hearing, and so they heard our arguments and have taken the case back under advisement.
Yeah, perfect. Well, so
Let me move on to something.
yeah, well, so I was just gonna say, so right now the court has signaled that it is going to issue a decision unless or until some concrete action by the Trump administration that might moot or make the underlying dispute no longer live or actionable. So that's a perfect segue into what are some actions that the second Trump administration might take and how they might take it to sort of unwind the ongoing litigation.
And I'm going to go through the next segment a bit quickly here so that we can tease up, make sure we have time for questions. And so during the campaign, President-elect Trump, as part of Project 2025, said that he would renew those leases in about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes was that. So that sets the stage for where we're at right now. If you please move to the next one here. And so there are a few different types of actions. One might be an executive order. The second might be administrative action that we've been talking about for much of this program here. And the third is legislative action. And so perhaps there's an executive order as soon as January 20th. There may be administrative action that'll take several months, or there may be legislative action. And there is proposed legislation that's on the table that would impact this very directly. And this is legislation proposed by Pete Stauber. Move to that slide there. And so this is the bill that was introduced last year, or last legislative session of Congress. And it would reinstate Twin Metals leases. It would undo the 20-year moratorium. It would prevent judicial review of the decisions related to the mineral leases and permits associated with that. And then the fourth thing, it would truncate environmental review to 18 months. So this is very radical legislation that was actually passed by the US House last year. So this is the Stauber legislation that, again, has those four elements that would undo the 20-year moratorium and would reinstate Twin Metals mineral leases. There's also other legislation before Congress, and this has been introduced by Betty McCollum. And this is Betty McCollum's permanent protection of the boundary waters bill. And this would take that 20-year moratorium and make it permanent. And so those are the two pieces of legislation that have been before Congress. And now we have a much different scenario, right? We have the Republicans control the House, and the Republicans narrowly, but they still control it. They also control the Senate. And so this really makes it a scary scenario in which that starver legislation could perhaps be included in bigger legislation that would move through the process and perhaps pass as part of what they call reconciliation. A reconciliation bill deals with budget issues. So there's a real risk that this legislation could move forward. And so while we were in Washington D.C., we met with several offices, several congressional offices to discuss this. We met with Betty McCollum and her staff on this. I'll go through a few of them. We met with Kelly Morrison's staff. She's just came into office from the West Metro, and it was a huge boundary waters advocate when she was in the Minnesota legislature. We met with Ilhan Omar, who has also supported Betty McCollum's bill. We met with Angie Craig's team. Angie Craig has not been a co-sponsor of this Betty McCollum's legislation in the past. So that was the legislative team was very much on the ball, and this would be someone who all of you in Angie Craig's district could advocate for, kind of going forward, getting Angie Craig on to be a co-sponsor of this. We've met with also some out of Minnesota elected officials that have been co-sponsors of Betty McCollum's bill in the past. Marcy Kapper, who's the longest serving woman in the US congressional history from Toledo, Ohio. Debbie Dingle from the Detroit area, and Jamie Raskin from the Maryland area. All three really distinguished members of Congress that have supported Betty McCollum's legislation. We did not get a meeting with Amy Klobuchar's team, but we did meet with Tina Smith's staff, and you know, I'll shoot it straight with all of you. We really need Tina Smith to support Betty McCollum's legislation. She has not committed to it, and if this legislation is ever to have a chance to pass, we need a member, either Amy Klobuchar or Tina Smith, to support the bill in the Senate. And so, for all of our supporters out here, this would be a really important advocacy action by us, is to have you contact Tina Smith, contact Amy Klobuchar, and put the pressure on to support what Betty McCollum has been advocating so much for the last several years. So it is so important to have that citizen action pressure. And I'm going to go through a couple other slides here to tee up to understand that advocacy is both at the federal and state level, And so we're going to advocate for Betty McCollum's bill that will be reintroduced in the upcoming time period here. It'll have a new bill number, but we'll strongly support that. And the work at the state level we've been advocating is the Prove It First bill, the Bad Actor bill, and taxpayer protection. So we have a system of government where we have the federal and state government. It's important to work at both levels. And then finally, we have a specific action coming up here that I want all of you to be part of, and that's our Boundary Waters Day at the Capitol. That's going to happen on January 23rd, just next week here. So we have another slide for that. I want you to put that on your calendar right now and be part of it and contact our office. It's really important to have you present for that and have that public pressure on our elected officials to support legislation to protect the boundary waters. Why don't we have a few minutes here to go through some questions, and I want to emphasize here that all of you are the source of the strength of Friends of the Boundary Waters, from our founders that include Bud Heinzelman, Chuck Dayton, Erica Sitz, all of them that were part of this going through the years. You are part of this, and this is what we're going to continue doing. And so, Jenny, do we have a few questions out there that we can address?
Eric is asking, walleyes in Crane Lake have more mercury in them than 64 out of 65 species of commercial seafood monitored by the FDA. This is because of sulfate pollution from Mintac in Virginia. All mining wastewater discharge to the BWCA must be prohibited outright. What are you doing to make this prohibition become law? Which sounds like somewhat covered.
We somewhat covered that, but this emphasizes the, two things. There, on Birch Lake, the Dunkel pit there, that was a taconite mine that actually went through the sulfide ore. And from that, that's on Birch Lake, right by, for those of you that know that area, it's not too far from the Twin Metals site. Mercury from that activity decades ago is still going into the water system. And I know Eric Morrison and Tom Bowes and Bob Tammon and others are doing that sampling, and they're tracing that mercury going through all the way through the Rainy River water system. And as the viewer identified, the taconite mining is by no means innocuous. It has significant environmental impacts on the watershed and air quality as well. So is there another question there that we can get to? I imagine, we're kind of towards the end here, but I want to honor.
Yeah, there's a few more questions. Betsy's asking, UMNNRRI is researching ways to treat sulfide mine waste. Do you hear any good news from them?
There. So the University of Minnesota on the Duluth campus has a research facility there. I have not heard where they're at with trying to reduce the sulfate discharges there. They're doing some additional research on other potential sources of components for mineral components for batteries. I'm not sure where they're at right now on the research. To kind of put it to you, we cannot thank you enough, and we do this in community. What you have on our screen right now are some of the organizations and businesses that are part of our coalition to protect the boundary waters. And we're a grassroots movement, and as I tell our team here, it's not a moment in time, but a true movement. And in addition, maybe we'll go to the slide again for the Boundary Waters Day at the Capitol and the other activities we have coming up here. So again, Thursday, January 23rd, Boundary Waters Day at the Capitol, followed by a post-event celebration. Celebrating is an important part of life, and we want to have community after our event at the Capitol. So that'll be at Bad Weather Brewing in St. Paul right after our rally at the Capitol. And then finally, we're getting very close to permit day. Permit day is on January 29th this year. And in anticipation of that, we'll have a pre-permit day party, and we'll go over some routes as well. So that'll be on January 27th. We have a slide for that. So January 27th, please join us for our trip planning, trivia night, and again, that's part of celebrating the boundary waters that we love. You are the strength of protecting the boundary waters, and I want to thank you. And today, I especially want to thank you, Eric Barstad, and the team at Robbins Kaplan. Robbins Kaplan has represented us for nearly 15 years in various legal matters, and in this matter since early 2018. So thank you, Eric. Thank you to Steve Safransky. Thank you to Tom Malin, Dick Gallen, all the Robbins Kaplan team that is making this happen. And Brian Michelle as well. Thank you for making sure I did forget the full team. Brian Michelle is on our board of directors, and thank you, Max, for leading our legal effort internally here. So again, thank you, friends of the Boundary Waters, everyone out there. Have a great afternoon. Contact us with additional questions to follow up on this. We'll respond to that. Have a great afternoon. Again, thank you, Eric. Thank you, Max. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.